All right, everyone. It is now 10 o'clock. Good morning. I am Aaron Blumberg, SWFLN's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to SWFLN's Management Institute for Library Excellence, also known as SMILE, Setting Departmental and Individual Goals. We have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Claudia Monte. Claudia Monte founded CAM Consulting Group, LLC as a full-service HR and management consulting and training firm in 1993 to assist organizations and their most important asset, people, achieve success. Since then, she has been privileged to deliver professional development programs to clients across the country in the library, legal, nonprofit, public, and private sectors. Claudia specializes in coaching individuals to strengthen their emotional intelligence in the various facets of their personal and professional lives. With 3 major corporations. She received her degree from Whitner University and is an adjunct instructor for Florida Southwestern State College. Please welcome Claudia and enjoy her webinar this morning. Claudia?
Well, thank you, Aaron. Before I go any further, I just want to make sure, can we do a little test that everybody can hear me just fine? Somebody tell me. Are we good? Yes, yes, yes. Then we're ready to rock and roll. Good morning, everybody. All right, and welcome to the first in a year, actually almost a year-long series that will focus on core competencies, interesting topics that are in support, of managing people, directing people in the efforts of others. And I'm sorry I got distracted, but this restart message came across, and this is not the time for this computer to restart. So let's keep our fingers crossed. If I ignore that message, it will disappear. So I guess what I should say is, welcome to the world, the real world, where in spite of best plans, despite of best goals, guess what? There are a lot of detours that tend to come into play, and that is a big part of what we'll be talking about today. So you may say that the title of this series, the Southwest Florida Library Network Management Institute for Library Excellence, also known as SMILE. I thought SMILE was a very good acronym, especially since everything we're going to be talking about has to deal with people. And what do people bring with them every day? Generally speaking, what do people bring with them every day in the world of dealing with people? Somebody give me some feedback here. Oh, they bring their problems, they bring their personal baggage. They bring their hidden agendas. Boy, everybody's having a really good week this week, I could tell. But how about something positive that people bring along with them? Tell me something good. They do. They bring their experience. They do bring a smile. Let's hope. They bring some thank yous. They bring their desires. They bring their wishes. They bring diversity. They bring their humor. And thank goodness we do have that humor, because quite frankly, when it comes to dealing with people, the days can be challenging. Because people bring life along with them every day. And in that process of helping people meet their goals, communicating throughout that, keeping everybody on the right track, and by the way, helping to keep yourself on the right track while you're managing, organizational challenges, while you're managing your own bosses, along with managing the efforts of others, we better keep a sense of humor. We better laugh. We better smile, because people can be, our best reward. They're a gift. They make organizations come alive. But there are some days, and there's no other way to say it, sometimes I think they fell from the sky. But what do? We pick ourselves up the next day. We laugh a bit. My theory is drink a little bit of wine, have a piece of chocolate, and you're ready for a new day. Right? And you go back and start all over again. Well, you might say that's a big part of our theme as we look at these topics when it comes to dealing with people, is to really see how do we make the process work a little bit more effectively, more easily, so that we can continue the smile, so that we can help individuals, and in the process of helping individuals, help ourselves and help our departments, and consequently help our organizations achieve the goals, that are out there in front of them. So I'm curious, of those of you who are registered for today, how many of you participated in the previous series on successfully supervising people that we offered, earlier this year? I'm just curious. Did anybody join me previously? No. Let's see what we have. So it looks like we have a mix of yes, no, some of the sessions. Well, for those of you who joined me previously, I welcome you back. For those of you that are new to all of this, well, this is a great way to start, because when it comes to having a leadership role and you want people to follow you and you want people to meet objectives, well, for goodness sakes, you have to let them know what they are. And that's what kicks off everything, having good goals. And you're going to see there is a lot, it's almost an art, to the goal setting process, that we will discuss today. Now, the series, as I said, this is the beginning part of a series. And what we have scheduled so far, and we'll look at this on a quarterly basis, is today's session is on setting departmental and individual goals. We're going to take an overall look at that whole process. Now, our next session that's set for November 2nd, and I do hope you register for this, and again, it's going to be from a management perspective, on how to really deliver not just customer service, but excellent customer service. And you'll see how today's topic, when we talk about really defining the values of your libraries, of your organizations, really ties into how we define the expectations of service that we will deliver to our customers. So that will be a webinar session, same time on November 2nd. However, the third session, what we're trying to do is have two webinar series, and then every third session come together in a class setting at SWFLN's offices in Fort Myers, and really have an interactive class session where we can dive into a lot of these topics. And you get to meet some of your colleagues and share what's happening, across the variety of libraries. And what I think some of the best learning occurs is when we have these conversations and see what we can learn from each other. I like to look at my role as a facilitator of the conversations, bring some resources. I can bring you my experiences from traveling around the country. I've had the privilege of working with libraries as a market of ours for over 15 years. So my insight comes as the visitor who goes in and begins to see what is happening within the libraries and try to share, what you might say are best practices and at times worst practices that all become learning experiences for all of our values. So the third session will be a full day session in December, and that's really going to focus on those core leadership skills, but with an interesting twist, considering that we're doing it December the 14th. So please, as you can, as Aaron has these up, please register. Would love to have you join throughout. And then stay tuned, all right, to see what the next series will be, as we kick off the year of 2017, which I cannot believe is coming up to all of us. However, in saying that, this is an evolving series, and it belongs to you all. So if there are topics that you would like to see addressed that would help you in your roles, please, at the last screen that I will share with you, will have all of my contact information on it. Send me an email, because I do want to make sure that at the end or throughout, whenever you can join us, you have gotten your questions answered. You could say at the end that I found some value, that this was helpful. So please, stay in touch with me. Let me know what you would like to see addressed, and we'll do our best to build it into the topics that we have. So that is what you might say is the framework, for the SMILE series that we're rolling out this year. Again, it's my privilege to be with you. So how about we get into this morning's topic on goal setting? And I like to always kick off with a quote. So I think quotes tend to stay with us, and it's always interesting to hear somebody else's perspective. And this one was one of my favorites. It comes from Henry Kissinger. It says, if you do not know where you are going, every road will get you nowhere. So, question for you. Let me ask you a question before we get to the one on this slide. How do we feel if we don't know what we're working towards? And if you've ever been in that situation where you're somewhat guessing as to what you're doing is right, what you're doing is wrong, you don't even know what it is you should be doing, how do you start to feel? There's a lot, you're right, Rose, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes into play. And the more uncertain you are, what does that begin to lead to? Let's see what George has to say here. You get frustrated. Absolutely, you get incredibly frustrated because you end up confused. You don't know what you're contributing to. Ex-Navy cook silence, full mouse. You lose, George. You begin to lose your focus. And Linda, let's see what your thoughts are here. There's excitement about lots of possibilities, but the thing is that what we want to see is, what are those possibilities? We'd like to remain excited, but if we don't ever receive some feedback, if we don't necessarily get our goals and expectations defined, do you see how quickly that excitement, when we start out on something, can turn into frustration? And if it turns into frustration, we can lose our focus, and very clearly, you're going to see how goal setting and motivation are very interconnected and interrelated to each other. Because if we don't, organizationally, well, let's look at this from an organizational point of view, not just personally how we feel about this. What is the outcome? If there aren't clearly established goals and expectations, what is the outcome? Inability to advance, without the education or the learning to what we're doing. Stasis where everybody doesn't move, where there's no growth. There's that lack of motivation. You see how motivation comes into that? And how productive are people if they don't know what it is they should be doing? You're right, Trina, they go in the wrong direction. If they go in the wrong direction, they can't be very productive or very efficient about achieving what is set out there, for the outcome that they would like to drive their results. And so consequently, it begins to have an effect not only personally about how people feel and the level of frustrations that begin to build, but it's going to have an effect on teamwork. Because if the team doesn't know what the goals are, and everybody's going in their own direction, and it's not a consistent direction, right? So you see how now, you can create dysfunctional teams because people are not responding, to each other the way that they should. They're not getting the work done the way that they should, right? And consequently, what begins to happen departmentally, you're not achieving your objectives and so on, as everything is in alignment. So that process of setting goals is designed to really provide direction. And if you think about the essence of management, it's directing the efforts of others to achieve their goals. It's directing the efforts of others towards positive outcomes. So how we go about that is crucial to the relationships we set up with the individuals that we have responsibility for. And not also, the individuals that we are accountable to and organizationally. So as we look at all of this, you can begin to see the importance of not only setting very good goals, but also in communicating them. So how do we go about that? Well, when you might say the actual components in understanding a goal, because how often do you hear people say, oh, I know what my goals are. But do you really? Because your components, or you might say the anatomy of a goal, has these three parts to it. The what is the actual goal itself. And it exists to really provide purpose. I'm curious, on an individual perspective, how many of you have your own personal goals written down? Where you would like to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Well, George, I see a no here. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll decide to put them down. Deborah's got them in her mind. Janet, there's another no. Some no's, sometimes. You see how all of this, we have a lot of ideas floating around in our minds as to what we need to do or what we would like to do or where we would like to be. Well, until we start to make it real, and this is why as we break it down and understanding the elements of a goal, we can look at another year, we're coming up to another year and say, oh my gosh, what happened? I still didn't do. And it's because it's been in our mind, but we haven't yet made it real. And that's what these exercises are about. So the what is your purpose. It's the actual definition of the goal. In support of that, it's why is it even a goal? In other words, what are the benefits to be gained as a result of setting this goal? What would you really like to achieve? Why is the goal even important? Why do we want to do this? And then what's really key is how do we make it come alive? The strategy really are the plans that go into it. Look at it as a roadmap. And a roadmap has benchmarks along the way where we could see how are we doing? Are we really achieving the benefits that we wanted to achieve in support of the goal that we originally set? So these three key components, you may say, set the tone for everything else that we do, whether it's from an organizational level, a departmental level, or an individual level. Everything we're talking about here today with an emphasis on our professional lives, guess what, are life skills. And it applies to us as individuals too personally. And so how we do that is going to have a real key effect upon the outcomes that we can achieve. So these are the three key components that make up a goal. Now, the actual structure that falls into this, you might say it starts from the larger and works it down to the smaller. Now, again, there's a great quote, and it comes from the work of Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And those 7 habits, that book, or anything that I do reference throughout today, is going to be on a reference slide at the end of the presentation. And 7 habits, you might say, became a business Bible as to 7 key competencies that we should keep in mind that are going to allow us to be more effective as individuals, more effective in dealing with others. And this quote is one of the habits, and it is begin with the end in mind. What does that quote really say? Curious as to your feedback on that. Begin with the end in mind. What's it telling us to do? Purpose, Rose, and there we're going to go. Define the end step. Good way of putting it, George. What's the end step that we have here? And Deborah's like, let's go for it. But we have to know what we're going for. There's your end step there. So in this whole goal setting process, it begins with what are your organizational goals? You're all part of something bigger than who you are. Well, whatever is set organizationally needs to be supported by the various departments. And all of you may be structured a little bit differently. But each of the departments, each of the different teams that you have, should be what you do, what your objectives, the goals that are set for you should be in alignment with where the organization is and the overall goals that are set there. If you aren't in alignment, what can happen is you can have departments going against departments, and consequently, right, we're not all shooting for the same organizational objective. Well, even more so, as we go from the greater to the smaller, everything at some point comes down to the individual. So for each person who commits to the organizational objectives or the organizational mission, they need to know what their expectations are so that everything they do is in alignment with the greater goals that are set above them. So everybody plays a part in making the organizational vision, so to speak, come alive. But we need people to make that, but we do need the people to make that happen. So how we share that info is really, really key. So questions for you. Let's look at it from the greater as we work our way down to the individual. What is the mission? 3 key questions from an organizational perspective always. First one, what is the mission of your library? Now, I'm curious, where is your, well, let's start here. A, do you all have defined mission statements in your libraries? Deborah's saying yes, yes. Yes, but it's old. They do need to be revisited. Yes, and you have posters in the break rooms. We have a mission statement for the school. Right, now let's look at the purpose of a mission statement. That really does define, and I said the word purpose, it really does define your purpose. Why are you there? Where should, George had a very good comment. He said we have it on posters in the break room. Where should the mission statement be posted? Library webpage, on the back of name badges, everywhere, email signatures, or website. Deb, Trina, have something to add here? School catalog, public areas. Okay, you're all getting that. That a mission, sometimes you see a mission statement, and they are things that really should be revisited to make sure that they're relevant to your purpose today. You'll see how a vision, is where are you moving towards in the future, but your mission is your purpose today. And it really should be posted in your public areas, but more importantly, in all of your staff areas, your employee entrances. George said on the back of name badges. That's one of my favorites. I had a client that did that because if we were in class, I'd be asking you to tell me what your mission statement is. And it's very interesting. Most people can give me bits and pieces of a mission statement, but not necessarily the whole one. And so consequently, the more that it's out there, the more that it's visible, the more that people remember it. So as you revisit it, please make sure it's short, sweet, and to the point. As Trina said, bookmarks in the library, people hold them, they look at that, the staff hands them out. The name badges, and why I'm a fan of that, as is George, is when an individual puts that badge on every day. They are committing, right, to living that mission every day. And now do you see how that interconnects so very closely with the tenets of excellent customer service? It's the how. And I got very much introduced to that and was impressed because I had a class, and this was a hospital in New York, where everybody could tell me the mission statement. And that was one of the first places where I saw it, and they had it on the back of their name badges. And they said if we're having a day, and I'm sure we all have these days, where we don't know if we feel like doing this anymore, or we aren't necessarily as sharp as we should be, well then that name badge, we look at that name badge and it brings us back to what's really our purpose in being here. And it helps us focus and refocus again on the patient care and the patient service that we want to deliver from a perspective of excellence. So that mission, especially as you bring in new hires, let them know what that is, give that to them, but make sure it's everywhere. I've seen it, not only I like it when you sign in the morning, it's right there on the computer. It's the first thing that staff sees. And a reminder, this is why we are here today. So hopefully that's a little bit of food for thought. When you go back after this, go look and see how visible is it really. And it is in those public areas because we also want the public to respect our mission and understand too, why we are here. The second part of goal setting is in support of the mission, is being able to define, what your library's values are. And these are usually are very key words. And if people don't remember the wording of the mission statement, most people will remember the values that drive everything you do on a daily basis. So whether your values are integrity, honesty, service, somebody give me a couple more. How would you describe the values in your library? Values are. We have excellence, integrity, everybody with me. Now, when we values, try to come up with no more than 3 to 5 key values that are then shared by all. And this is what we commit to, in living the mission. The values contribute to how an organization lives its mission and are a key component in determining your strategic vision. It's how everything comes alive. And the third element that comes in is now, if organizationally we have this set, departmentally, what are your objectives in support of the mission and the values of your library? And your departmental objectives, should be set. I'm not exactly sure how you do them, but a lot of people set them on an annual basis. But here's the key question. How often are they reviewed against what are set for progress achievement? So give me some idea how your departmental objectives are established. Are they done on an annual basis? Do you revisit them monthly? How are you all handling this? How do you know what your department's doing in support of? How do you know how you are performing against your objectives and your goals? It's tied to the annual evaluations, but evaluations are done on an annual basis. How often do you revisit them along the way? Remember, goal setting is a roadmap with benchmarks. I see annual review. George, newly promoted, still figuring that all out. Deborah is constantly. Well, George, as you're figuring that out, keep in mind, if they are set and this is what you have, we need to review them time to time throughout the year. I'm a fan of doing it at least quarterly to see how we're doing, because many times we may have the goals set, but life tends to interfere and we may need to make some adjustments to those goals. Because you'll see as we look at the actual way of holding people accountable for them, a key piece of it, are they attainable? Are they relevant? Are they realistic? And circumstances can change. So it isn't good enough just to set them at the beginning of the year for your annual review or annual performance. You need to revisit them and see how you are doing against them and sharing that feedback so people know they're on the right path, or maybe they need to modify the path so that we can lead them towards goal attainment. So all of this, as you see, is from the greater piece as we look organizationally and departmentally. Well, it always comes down to the individual. And these are 3 very, very key questions that we need to get some answers to. If you are the manager of the department, supervisor, department head, whatever title you might have, bottom line, you have responsibility for others. You need to know what is expected of you from whoever it is that you report to, because that is then going to drive what you expect from others and those expectations that you're going to establish with each member of your team. Do you agree with that statement? Most people want to do the right work and do it well. And I don't say all, because I will tell you right now there's always a couple there that exist to make life difficult. But most people, tell me if you agree with that statement, that most people come in every day and they want to do a good job and they want to do it well. Do you agree with that? Deborah is a yes. Linda is a yes. Yes, yes. There's that few no. I'm telling you, that few no show in there. But the majority, I truly, after all of these years, and I've been doing this over 20-some years now, I truly, truly believe that most people want to do the right work and do it well. Now it's up to us in leading them to help them achieve that. So it's not only giving them the expectations, but it's communicating them clearly and also explaining and defining what the priorities are. We can have people work really, really hard and turn something into you and still not meet your expectations because you wanted them to do something different. Communication is probably one of the biggest challenges, to get everybody on the same path and understanding, what the expectations are and where you're leading them towards. Because one of the biggest challenges of communication is interpretation. So clarity of communication goes a long way to helping people know what it is that they need to do and what it is they should be doing first, second, and third along that path. So how we do that is really key. The delivery of feedback in letting people understand where they are is probably one of the biggest motivators that's out there. If you go into and look at the hierarchies of motivation, right up there towards the top of the pyramid, is they use the term ego. Maslow's motivation uses the term ego. Well, it's not ego that you have a big ego. It's ego from a very positive perspective. It's ego that people are looking for feedback. They want some recognition. They want to know that they are contributing. So the more feedback that we can share that says to individuals, you're doing well, this is the right path, I appreciate, feedback that we give that this is not exactly what we need to do a little bit more of this or that, guess what? That's welcome too, because it gets them on the right path. So always keep in mind, if somebody isn't doing something that's meeting an expectation, what can we do from a communication perspective to help redirect them? And redirect is a great way of saying that. It's not punitive, it's not punishing. The idea is to get everybody to meet their goals, meet their expectations, so that by the time you do get to review time, there aren't any surprises. So as we go back and we begin to start to look at this, we have to say, what's the right way to deliver this feedback? So please make it ongoing. At your staff meetings, just call it, let's have a little bit of a touch base as to where we are. Keep the goals in front of individuals. Same as we keep the mission in front, keep the goals in front. As personally, for our own goals, if you get to the point where you finally do write them, don't write them, put them in a book, write them, post them, look at it. Because each day we take one step that gets us closer to where we want to be. So whether we're on a personal path or we're on a professional path, we always want to keep that in the back of our mind. Now, as we said, in trying to help people meet their expectations, we want to be able to communicate the goals. It isn't good just to say we have them Let's make sure everybody understands what their role is in meeting them. Well, I bring up on this slide probably one of the best models of communication I believe that is out there, because it is very simplistic. And it's known as the Johari Window. And it's based on the work of Joseph Ingram and Harry Luft, who came up with the name Johari, very unique way of pulling them together, that took all the complexities of communication and simplified it towards looking through 4 window panes. And what I'm showing you, are the window panes and what they actually mean. So in where it says public knowledge would be that it's information that is known both to me and to you. What we are doing this morning in this webinar is public knowledge to some degree. I am sharing some info. I'm asking you some questions, and when you respond, right, you're now in my realm of public knowledge, because we are discussing, we are sharing, we are giving, and we are receiving feedback. So it's known to me and you. However, and this is the window, and that's why I put it in red, that creates the most problems. This is what are called blind spots. These are thoughts and feelings that we have not shared. So consequently, you might say it's known to you and not to me. So if there is something that I am doing that you don't like, that you don't agree with, and you don't ever tell me about it, well then guess what? I am blind to the effects of my words and actions on you. So if I don't know what I am doing, what am I going to do tomorrow? What do you think? You're exactly right, John. I'm going to continue doing the same thing and continue doing it the same way. And what's going to happen now is that you become frustrated and say, why can't I get Claudia to ever do what I want her to do? And yet Claudia is thinking that she's doing the right thing. See how now we get patterns of behavior, right, that come up, right, and take us away from the goals, create frustration, and at the same time create a perception that somebody is not doing their job. If individuals aren't meeting their expectations, step back and think about how you can have a conversation with them to review exactly what they are doing and understand why they are doing it that way, so that you can redirect them. If you don't ever have this conversation, how fair is it then to say to somebody, you're not doing your job, when maybe they really believe they are? This is so very critical, especially as you bring on new hires who come in enthusiastic, want to do a good job, want to do it the right way, and are hungry. I am telling you, they are hungry for some directions and some feedback. And so how you share that's key. So I always say, think about yourself. If you would want somebody to tell you if you were doing something wrong or something that really annoyed them or they didn't think was inappropriate, would you want to be told? And if the answer is yes, then think about how you would want somebody to tell you. And that's how you start to develop a comfort level in removing blind spots with others. That's really the act of sharing, giving and receiving constructive feedback. Feedback is the whole tenet underneath the Johari window. Right. The third window is what's called the hidden area. And this is known to me and not to you. All individuals, until they create a comfort level with others, we don't necessarily share everything. So we keep it hidden from others. But as we start to feel comfortable with our teams, as we start to feel comfortable with our bosses, the environment, the organization, right, we start to come out of our shells a bit and share some more. And the more that we do that, right, do you see how now it all begins to lead, into that window of public knowledge? And then the fourth window is what's called the unknown area. And the unknown are these thoughts and feelings we have that are not necessarily on the surface. So in other words, they're not really known to either of us, neither you nor me. However, if somebody pushes our button, isn't it amazing where this reaction comes from? And it's like, wow, what generated all of that, or what started all of that? At which point it rises to the surface and the unknown then becomes known. So the goal in sharing this with you, in that communication process, is to bring those expectations, to bring your mission, to bring your values, to bring your departmental objectives into the realm of public knowledge. And have it there, and the more that you review them, the more you give individuals constructive feedback along the way, the better chance you have of achieving, the outcomes that you're looking for, when it comes to moving individuals along that path. So I hope you found this conversation on Johari. This will keep popping up at various times because communication, as I said, is the hardest thing to get to work anywhere. And sometimes I think we just lose sight and we think, well, they should know. And the minute we say they should know is the opportunity to step back and say, but what do they really know? And maybe it's time then to clarify. And as we clarify, we might achieve some more constructive outcomes. So what I included for you on this next slide, is exactly what I just said. So that is in support of each. It's more verbiage for you in support of the purpose of each of the windows. So you not only saw the windows, but you also saw, the very concise way, of looking at the windows. In addition to this is what really defines each of the windows that fall under this model of communication known as the Johari window. Does anybody have any questions at this point as we move a little bit further along? Everybody still with me? Rose, you're still with me? Linda, so we're on a good path here. We're on a good path. All right. Now, in this communication, let's bring it down, into this wonderful world known as delegation, which is a skill in and of itself. And delegation takes your goals and objectives that you have and brings them to the individual level. And it's delegation, as I said, is a skill because it is a skill of good communication. Curious, can you delegate responsibility to individuals to do a job? Can you delegate responsibility for a job to individuals? I see yeses, yeses, yes. Certainly, of course, you have to. All right, so the purpose, is to make individuals responsible for carrying out an assignment, or the task of their positions. Can you delegate authority to an individual to carry out the job? Yes, here's another yes. Yes, sure. Because how can you make somebody responsible for doing something if you don't give them the authority, right, to carry it out? Or the tools and the resources, right, that are going to allow them to fulfill that responsibility. But can you delegate accountability, overall accountability for that assignment or that project? So you know. Yes, they have to be able to own the task, George, but you're to see maybe it's the semantics that we're looking at with accountability and responsibility. All right, let's see what Rose has to say here. Yes, for them to have full responsibility. Now, my question was, can you delegate overall accountability, right, for that assignment or that project? They can be accountable for it. They certainly are responsible for it. They have to have the authority to do that. But here you go, John. Accountability is shared because, let's say, for example, somebody does not meet the goals of that project. Who is your director going to come to first? That person who reports to you, or are they going to come to you? Aha, okay, yes, then it's shared, they're going to come to you. So you see how with delegation, we are delegating responsibility for it, to do, the task or the project, the assignment, whatever is out there. We are giving them the authority and the resources to do this. And in that process, we're holding them accountable for carrying through. But always remember, and this is why it's important to build in benchmarks along the way so there aren't any surprises, overall accountability of everybody's performance in your department or team will come back to you. And that is the one thing you cannot give away. And so how we delegate, there's the skill of that. You want to make sure in the communication to the individuals that you tell them not only what the assignment is, but what is the importance and the relevance of it. Most people, and again, most people want to do a good job and do it well, is that when they understand why, here's the purpose, you get commitment to it. You get a shared commitment to it even easier. And the goal in life is to reduce some pushback. But when people understand how they're contributing, to the goal, or why they're doing is important, or what the value of what they're doing, they tend to embrace it so much more. Be very clear about what your expectations are. Set very specific standards. Shortly I'm going to tell you what the acronym SMART stands for, which is going to help you in your goal writing, and it's also going to help you with your performance reviews. Right. Don't necessarily just set them, but clarify their understanding of them. Here we go back to, you don't want any blind spots out there where people just nod their heads and say, okay, okay, but what are they saying okay to? Give them the resources to do the job, because the whole goal we're trying to do here is set people up to succeed. And that is the overall goal of everything. Obtain the feedback regularly, whether you do it semi-formally on a quarterly basis, or it is just ongoing every time you pull your staff together, or one-on-one touch base. Give them support, so that you open up the door if you have questions, if you need advice, if you need direction, that you're there to support them. But here's what's key. Don't ever take it back. Remember, we said they are accountable for doing this. And the minute somebody comes to you with that question, sometimes it's easier to say, oh, I'll take care of it, leave it here. Well, at the end of the day, you can have a desk full of, I will take care of it. We also call this monkeys on our back. We have everybody else's monkeys on our back, which comes from a great book, 1 Minute Manager Meets the Monkey. And you have become a victim of what's called reverse delegation. And I will tell you it happens, and it happens quicker than you can imagine. So your role is to demonstrate, I will support you in your efforts, but you're still responsible for doing the work. And above all things, give credit when due. People work really hard. And if they work really hard, we want to make sure that they get the recognition that they so deserve. Because that is when they've reached all of that, and that's what does really do make us smile. And it's nice to see them smile too and make that happen. So those elements of delegation, as you can see, all of these, even though we do them on separate slides, they're all interrelated. They're all in alignment. Do one without the other. Now, what I have for you, and this is what I try to build in each of the sessions, is a case study, some examples. Let's take, because it's great to talk about this, but I also like to see it real. So I'm going to give everybody a moment. The next slide is a short case study. I'd like you to read it. And then just tell me when you're finished. If you could just get it high sign from a couple, just say, okay, then we'll move on to some questions in support of that. So please take a moment and read this case study that's up here now. As soon as you finish reading it, just type OK. Once I see a couple of those, we'll go on to the questions. Okay, okay, okay. All right. Question for you. As I said, our overall goal is to help set people up to succeed. Were they set up, these new hires, these new supervisors that came in, were they set up to succeed or set up to fail? See how very quickly we can see that they were set up to fail. And there is a price that we pay. And when we have enthusiastic people that come in and we can't retain what we're hiring or perceived to be really good talent. So what is the big issue here? In spite of all their interviewing and everything that they did, there is a big issue here. What's happening here? Communication. They were absolutely lost. Training and mentoring wasn't there. Expectations were not defined. No follow-through once hired. They may have hired great people, but they didn't provide leadership for them. And people take a job if they feel comfortable in the job, because they're hungry for good leadership. They want some mentoring. They want to learn. They want to get involved in the entities where they work. Now, I see so many people who are excited about working and excited about their jobs. But conversely, I have to tell you, my travels, I see so many people who are disengaged and demotivated, from their jobs too. And so when we don't provide, direction, if we don't provide feedback along the way, right, we do lose people, and people don't want to fail. And so why we see new hires that are leaving here, when people become absolutely frustrated, how do they start to feel about themselves? And don't forget, these are new. Where does frustration, what's the toll of frustration on individuals? They start to get angry. They start to perceive themselves, here we go, as failures, and they start to lose their own sense of confidence. And that's not fair to do to anybody. And so consequently, because they're not getting what they need or should be getting, right, and this happens with people who are experienced, who take a job or who work for somebody who is not a very good leader. Has anybody here ever worked for a really bad boss at some point? Curious. Oh, George, several. I feel sorry for you. Okay. All right. Yes. Yes. Deborah, you've been lucky, and that is a very good thing. Janet once. And Janet, working for that individual, rose at some way, shape, or form, unless we've been really lucky, we've had that. How do we start to feel? Do we want to go to work? Feel threatened, you start to get depressed. It's amazing, unmotivated. Do you see how now, we are affected? People we're affected by other people. And one of the most crucial relationships that you can have is with whoever you directly report to, because this person is going to be your greatest advocate. And they're either going to advocate to move you forward, or they're going to advocate that you're not going to move, or it's going to reach the point, well, here we go, lack of communication where you don't know where you stand and you don't know what your value is, you don't know what you're bringing, that at some point you just don't even know if you should be there. And so do you see how now, and you're right, you start to feel foolish. All these feelings, and a lot are all rooted in emotion. They really reach out to our emotional intelligence we have here. Even though intellectually, our IQ, we know how to do this job, how we're feeling about it is having a real effect upon our motivation, our productivity, our efficiency, and consequently how we begin to feel about ourselves in that role. At some point, we wake up one day and say, we don't want to do this anymore. So do you see how, based upon your own experiences, you could see why these new hires, are leaving? And the cost of bringing in talent, retaining talent is huge. So we don't want to lose them, especially if they are good and they do have potential. So as the supervisor here, or what we learn from this, what is the supervisor's responsibility here? We have some that are gone, 2 not reviewed, not doing the right stuff, and 3 are out there hanging out there on their own. What's the supervisor need to start doing so that, you're right, the organization doesn't get a reputation that nobody wants to work there? Keep employees informed. Talk to them, show them how to do the job, let them know how they're doing their job. Pull the team together. And in the team, you're going to have people at various levels of expertise here. Give them the skills and tools needed to perform the job. Be available to them. And invite them to come back in. Sometimes you actually have to say that to people. Now, if you have any questions or review or set time aside, especially with new hires, they need more attention than those who have been with you for a period of time. But more than anything, as you look at what's important, is not only to be available, but to show some understanding, to make sure that you keep the lines of communication open, and that they do know, and that you do share, in your conversations, how important they are, all right, to the team, to the organization, and as individuals coming in there every day. Because that's your goal. You want them to keep coming back, and when they come back, to be productive, satisfied, motivated, and happy individuals. Seriously, we do want people to smile. That is the universal gesture of understanding. So if they're content in their job, they're satisfied with their job, guess what? That's going to work its way externally into the service that's provided, to your patrons, to your public, to everybody that walks in your doors, or visits and interacts in some way, shape, or form. Whatever is happening internally, I'm going to tell you, it works its way out externally. So always, 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 start within, as you look long term and you look at your goals in the delivery of service to others. So that is why today I really wanted to kick off with goal setting, as a real lead into our conversations, next month as it relates to customer service, because they do definitely tie together. Did you enjoy doing a case study? Did you find that interesting as a part of our conversation this morning? As if so, I'll continue to put them in. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I truly believe when we can look at a situation or we share, it makes the theories, right, that we said, they make them come alive, they make them real. And even though may write them very generally, right? You can always bring them back home to your world, right? And we can learn from it at that perspective. So let's see what we do, with these individuals that were in here. Again, bring it back to your world. And there is a great book, actually, where we look at Covey's 7 Habits as a Business Bible. Prior to that, and this came, I think the original version came out in the 80s, and it was called The 1 Minute Manager. And it was always one of my favorites because I am a fan of the books that I recommend to adult professionals. I want them to be short, sweet, and to the point because time is a huge luxury for us. And the original 1 Minute Manager came out, and it just had 3 things to do. Well, and it was set goals. Here's where we start. If they're meeting the goals, then praise them so that they stay on that path. And if they're not meeting the goals, right, then correct them. And I would say to everybody is in the world of supervision and management, if you at least do those 3 things, or you get them down, right, well then you're headed in the right direction. And then we'll fill it in from there. Well, last year they updated the book. And it's now called the new 1 Minute Manager. And what I wanted to share with you this morning, is you might say is a summary from that. Their perspective on 1 minute goals. And use that 1 minute loosely defined, but it's 1 minute to make you step back and revisit it on a regular basis. And in 1 minute goals, the emphasis is plan the goals together. Because don't forget, you're expecting somebody to live them. So you may know what the organizational goals are, but departmentally, how do we all pull together as a team to make this happen? You're in a leadership role in setting an example, so show people what good performance looks like. This is the way you want them to live. This is how they can, but show people. Literally, don't just say this is what you have to do. Show them how to do it. Have people write out their goals with due dates because writing provides structure and it makes them real. So I'm going to go back to you all individually. If you haven't written your goals down, write them down. Because I will tell you right now, once you start to write them down, you start to take some action steps against them. Ask your team members to review their most important goals each day. What do they need to accomplish that day? And to me, it's no more than 3 key things every day that have to get done. We do probably 100 things in the course of a day that we don't think about, but what are the 3 key things that must be done? And those 3 key things should always be in alignment of what your overall departmental goals or your team goals are. Encourage people to look at what they are doing to see if their behavior aligns with their goals. So you may have a goal of, let's provide service to our customers, excellent service to our customers. Well, that's great. And somebody may say, well, I checked out, and I'm speaking very hypothetically here, I checked out 50 books today. Well, that's great. Well, if you checked out those 50 books, but in the process you were rude, you didn't ask questions, you weren't nice to your fellow colleagues in the process, would I really say that you're meeting that goal? So behavior, remember you're always reviewing behavior aligned with performance, not necessarily just performance. So at times people need to step back and see, how are we doing in that delivery of our service? How are we doing as a member of a team? How are we doing in the feedback that as individuals we need to be providing up? Because remember, you need feedback from them as much as they need feedback from you. Redirect. I had said the word correct was in the original version. Here's redirect. If they're not meeting their goals, all right, let's see what we can do to get them back on track, because the whole idea, the whole purpose of setting the goals is to get people to be successful. And then praise them along the way. Really, I tell people, recognize the small wins. Don't necessarily wait for the big project to be done. Sometimes we need those little pushes along the way. And we have more wins in a day than you can imagine if we step back and just think about it. But don't only just think about it, acknowledge it with individuals. Praise their accomplishments so they continue to want to move forward, because that's the goal. We want to keep people moving and moving in a forward direction. So to write these goals and show, there is a great acronym, and it's called the SMART acronym. And it really is in support of, here's a quote, and I like this quote because to me it sums it all up. It says, a goal is created 3 times, first as a mental picture. So here's this concept that you have. Second, when written down, to add clarity and dimension. And this is where using this acronym is going to help you add the clarity and dimension, not only for yourselves, but for others that you're given the responsibility for carrying it out. And third, when you take action towards its achievement. Because it's great to have these things, write these things down, but if you don't have any movement towards them, well, you're never going to achieve the outcomes, right, that are hanging out there. So to write a good goal, and this will really help you with your performance reviews. We're going to go into the next slide, and in the next slide we'll look at the wording, all right, that I'm going to share with you against each one of these. But it's got to be specific, it's got to be measurable, it has to be attainable, it has to be relevant, and it has to be time-oriented. Create a time frame. Here are the due dates, because as I said to you, it's hard to believe we're in October, and we're in the last quarter of a year again. And what do we still need to accomplish? There's time. With due dates, they keep us focused. So, specific. What is the goal? What specifically do you want to accomplish? Not necessarily, generally we want to provide customer service, but what do you want it to look like? How are you going to break that down? Do you want to improve or increase, whatever it might be? But you have to be specific about what it is. Why is the goal? What's the purpose of that goal? Measurable. How are you going to know when it's been achieved? How are you going to measure it? How are you tracking that? Is it, not only is it measurable, but is it meaningful? If it's meaningful and you can give feedback and let people know along the way, guess what? It's not only just measurable, it's meaningful, but it's motivating, which is it gives you a better chance that people are going to achieve them. Is the goal attainable? Why do you want to achieve it? Where are your relationship to it? Is it realistic to where you are? We have come out of some very difficult years. And I truly respect the library profession and how you have managed all of these difficult years with budget cuts and increased demand for services. And now we're seeing some small steps in a very positive direction. Well, there were adjustments to the goals, in the hard years, and there still may be adjustments to the goals. And that's why whichever you set to somebody, they have to be attainable. You can't put pie in the sky. Yes, we'd all like to win. Yes, I want to have $1 million, so I'll buy a lottery ticket. Well, that might work for maybe 1 in a million. But maybe there are other things that we have to do, if we do want to achieve a financial goal or to do something. Is the goal relevant? How does it support the mission and the vision? Who's involved in helping achieve this goal? Remember, we said everything needs to be in alignment. So if your goal is going off totally in a different arena, then really what the mission of your organization is, or what the vision where you're headed, see how very quickly it creates a dysfunctional entity. Who's involved? So do we get everybody on the same page? Otherwise we have individuals doing their own thing, and I can't necessarily say then, that we have a team consensus towards what the objectives are and who's going to do what in helping reach them. And then finally, setting the time frame. When does it need to be completed? When are the checkpoints? How are you tracking this? So now do you see why you can't just wait till annual review time to see how you're doing? This has to be a continual conversation, you might say, on the performance continuum. That's why it's a continuum, of not only setting them, right, but along the way, seeing how you are doing, where you are in relationship to it. Is it still in support of your library's mission and vision? Do we still have the buy-in of everybody in there? And where are we according to our time frames and our checkpoints, and our deliverables on an ongoing basis, throughout the entire process. So I hope that you're seeing so far, right, that there is quite a bit, into setting departmental and individual goals. It is a whole process. It's a process with structure. It's a process with incredible meaning. And it ties in very much, all right, to your role as a leader. Because if anything, you want to know what you're leading people towards, which means you have to have them defined. And if you don't know what they are departmentally, well then guess what? That's your initiative to go to that next level up and say, what are we all doing? And if you don't get the feedback that you need, well then at various times you need to take the initiative and say, tell me how we are doing so I can share it with our department. Are we still, take this SMART acronym, are we still on the same path, or has direction changed because of? Because life, business life, our professional lives, and our personal lives sometimes do interfere with the best of plans. There is this thing, remember, called Murphy's Law? Murphy does pop up in every way, shape, and form. So I hope from the goal perspective, you've gotten a good foundation, because the last piece as we wrap up, our session for this morning, is once you have all of your goals, you have to realize none of this is static, right? You're always building upon, your accomplishments. But good leaders also have a strong vision. And strategically, you always want to keep thinking about how do we move forward. Your libraries, you are incredibly dynamic entities. And so consequently, go back to what you may have looked like, 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago with your collections and your services. Look at how in a very short period of time, your footprints have changed. What you're offering to people have changed. Your demographics may even be changing. So strategically, you have to keep that vision. You always have to keep looking and moving forward. And so as we bring things to a close today, I want you to build upon the goals and objectives that you have and use them to start to develop a vision strategically of moving forward. This is what is known as the McKinsey 7S model. The 7 elements that are very critical, to developing a strategic plan. And if you notice in the middle component is really what we started with, initially, organizationally, is knowing what your values are. Because your shared values are going to drive everything else strategically, that you put out there. Your structure, your systems, the style, your staffing, the skills of your staff, and the strategy in making it all come alive. So let's look on the next slide. We'll go into each one of these elements. And as you start to look at this and you think about this strategically, where do you want to be next year? Well, that strategic vision, where you might want to be in a new year, however you define your years, whether it's a calendar year or a fiscal year. Where you want to be in a year? I will tell you strategically, most entities now, I remember strategic visions as strategic plans we used to do at 7 years. Everything's changing so fast anymore. Are usually no more than about 3 years out. So if you look at this, where do we want to be next year? Where do we want to be next year in reference of maybe of a 3-year plan? And now let's see, are all of our goals still in alignment for that? So as you look at this vision, as you look at this model, well, they were all lined up, okay. Our strategy, what's your direction, what's your communication that you're going to issue in support of the direction where you're going to go? Who needs to know what? Do you have the structure and the organizational flow, in your reporting flows that are in alignment, that are going to help you with this new direction? Well, it's not only the structure and the flow, but what about your systems that are in place? do you have the processes and procedures that are going to, that not only support where you are today, but is it time to look at them to see, are they going to support where you want to move towards? Technology, as you know, is so fast today and is changing. Technology can make us crazy because one day we see it, one day we know it, and then the next day we get a new laptop and here we go and we start all over again. You know, I look at this slide, I looked at that slide, and everything was bulleted just perfect. Here's technology, and now it's doing its own thing. Right, so it's really very relevant because we're learning every day and we're adapting in that process. So what are your processes and procedures today? How long are they going to keep you moving forward? Style has to deal with your management and employees. Here again, you know, is behavior, professionalism. If they had the training, all right, that will allow them to interact with people and with each other, you know, in a constructive manner. Do you have a management team? Are your teams developed? Staffing. Do you have the staffing? What's your staffing going to look like? Your human resources are your critical part of your capital. Actually, they are the most critical part because without people, you don't have anything. They make it all come alive, all those elements that are above it. But do your people have the capabilities and the competencies and the skills that they're going to need to move them forward? And then finally, you know, are the values that have been driving you for so long, are they the same? Are they still as strong as they once were? You know, will they still remain your guiding concepts and your principles, all right, that are going to lead your vision, make your vision tend to come alive, you know, as you look forward strategically. So this is a continual assessment that you do, you know, to see not only where your organization is, where your libraries are, versus where it wants to be and or needs to be to keep you moving forward in the delivery of your services, you know, to your public, you know, to your patrons, you know, to all of those who depend so much on you. So continually assessing that, putting that out there, being attuned to it, makes that process just makes it a part of conversation. So that with that awareness, when it comes time to doing some planning, when it comes time to revisiting your goals and objectives, everybody's heads, sets, and mindsets are already wrapped around that. It's just part of your continuum. Because many times, you know, as you look forward, you know, and look at what you have achieved and now begin to look at what you still need to achieve or where you think you're going to be, you're going to bring in that element of change. You know, and change isn't easy, and that's another whole conversation that we'll have, right? But the more that people just are in that vibrant, have that energy about that, you know, continually, and they see that modeled in your behavior and your conversations and your directions and your feedback, well, then when change comes, they have a better chance of them embracing it, you know, versus resisting it. So leadership really is the ability to translate vision into reality. I think it's a great quote, you know, to wrap up our session. You know, if we started, you know, with saying that goals were so very important, right? What did Kissinger say? If you don't know where you're going, every road will get you nowhere. Well, hopefully through our session today, you begin to see the importance of goals and all the elements that go into defining the components and setting the structure and communicating them, communicating the expectations. Well then, you know, that only helps your role of leadership grow, and it really will help you translate your vision in helping people become successful into reality. So I hope that you've enjoyed our time together today. I wanted to share with you, you know, some of the books that I referenced. You have them right here. Here is that new 1-Minute Manager. The other one I really like, and as we go along, you know, we'll be referring to a model of leadership called situational leadership, and And this I like because it ties everything together. It says it's called Leadership in the 1-Minute Manager. Again, very short, sweet, and to the point. I referenced 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. If you've never read it, I strongly recommend it. My opinion, even though a book may have been written 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it has a lot to say, it's still a very, very good book. And that one is available on audio, and I really like the audio of that because it just gives you the highlights, and the highlights make you really think about those habits that are there. And then the other one, again, a short one, it's called QBQ, the question behind the question, goes back to our conversation on delegation about accountability and responsibility. So as people start to raise questions, what's the root cause? What's the root behind that question? And so, as we do all of that, you can begin to see, how you take it a little bit further and still make them accountable, all right, for what it is that they need to do, knowing that you have overall accountability. So the slides, Linda, you're asking, will these slides be available after the session? And Aaron, I believe you have that for everybody. Yes, you will have that. I do believe the session is recorded for access to. Aaron, can you please confirm that? Also a yes. So you can go back and you can revisit that. And any questions that you might have or anything that you would like to discuss, in greater detail with me, please, here's my information. Send me an email. And I also invite you, and I'm sincerely am looking for some feedback from you. If you like this format and continue in this format, it's also very good feedback from me, and also various topics that you would like to see addressed, over the course of our times together. So for everybody, life is good. Get out there, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so very much for the privilege of spending this morning with you. I look forward to seeing you again on November 2nd at 10 o'clock for delivering excellent customer service. Thank you, thank you. And special thanks to Deb, all right, for her wonderful translation services throughout the session this morning. Thank you, Deb.
And thank you, Claudia, for a wonderful webinar. Some information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. As Claudia did mention, if you enjoyed this webinar, be sure to sign up for Delivering Excellent Customer Service Skills, which will take place on November 2nd. Also, there's still time to register for When Opportunity Knocks, Will You Be Ready? Understanding what opportunity means, this Friday, October 14th. Big Ideas on a Small Budget and Other Innovative Funding Alternatives webinar on October 20th, and the rescheduled Diversity Discovery Institute A is for Attitudes webinar will be held on October 28th. We encourage you to look at the upcoming webinars and workshops in months ahead and hope you're all able to join us for future training opportunities. As always, please feel free to keep checking the SWFLN Continuing Education calendar on the SWFLN website, the Florida statewide calendar, our Facebook page, look for our Twitter messages, as well as the emails sent to the Florida Library listserv. Thank you everyone for attending and have a terrific rest of your week. And thank you, Deb, as always.
Okay. Bye, Aaron. Bye, Deb. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.